Hi, this is Natalie with Tangle Artistry, and today I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on painting these wooden signs with the 3D pieces. Depending on the kit that you get, you will have several different things in your kit. If you have a sponge brush like this and you ordered a wood sealing kit, that is for the sealer. So set that aside, don't use it for your painting. You want to save it for your sealing at the end. You also should have some paint. Sometimes they're in these containers, sometimes they're in these containers. It just really depends on the kit that you get and what's included. There's also some glue. So the glue is in these little containers. You just open it up. There's also a little applicator. They come in different colors, so just depending. They have this little foam piece on the end, so that's what you would use to apply your glue. Before you use your paints, you want to shake them up. I always make sure my lids are on really tight, and then I give them a good shake. You can also cut these, so you can cut them down so they're individual. I find that it's easier to work with them being individual than keeping them in the strips, but it's totally up to you. There are sponges. The sponges are reusable, so just put them in some water and wash them, and you can reuse them until they basically fall apart. I use them for months until they just kind of disintegrate on me. So don't be afraid to wash these out and reuse them. You do want to make sure you get them in water when they have paint on them, because if you leave them to set, the paint might get crusty and hard, and then you're not going to be able to use them. So make sure, I always just keep a bowl of water next to me. I throw them in the bowl of water while I'm working, so then that way I don't have to get up and wash them out each time, but they don't get hard and crusty since they're in the water. You can also cut these, so you can cut them down to make them smaller. So if you need to use a smaller piece to get into a smaller spot, you can do that. So this is one that I've cut in half. You can also cut them again. I've cut them into thirds and fourths, whatever you need. There is a paintbrush. The paintbrush is there just in case if you want it for a certain thing, or depending on the project, it might be a different paintbrush. But I don't really use paintbrushes with these types of projects. I mostly use the sponges. You also have a paper plate. This is to help you, you can take your paints and pour them onto the plate to paint out of there. It also helps when you're sponging to dab off the extra paint, because you don't want to make big blobs of paint on your pieces. And it also is going to help when if you're doing any blending, and I will show you that. So not included in the kit, but it is helpful but not necessary, is painter's tape. This is going to help you hold pieces down as you paint. So if you take it and turn it over so you make a ring, and then stick it down to your surface that you're painting on. The paint is not washable, so just be careful. Make sure put down like a newspaper or something that you don't care about getting dirty. It will wash off your hands if you give it a good scrub, but it does not easily clean off of surfaces or clothing. But the tape is really great trick for painting small pieces, because then you can put them on the tape, and then when you're painting they don't move around. Alternatively, if you do not have tape, I find it's easiest if I hold one side and I kind of paint this side over here and then let that dry for a minute and then go back and do the same. I find that's easier than trying to do it all at once or hold it or try and like work around the little areas. I just do one half and then I do the other half. Before you start, you may want to clean your pieces. These are cut with a laser, so sometimes when the laser cuts, it kind of singes the edges, so you have a little bit of some soot on your pieces. So in your kit there is a baby wipe, just depending on the kit and what is available to me at the time. They might look different, but you're just going to open these up, and you can see on this one how there's some darker spots. If you just wipe with the baby wipe, I also like to get the edges. It'll take that darker soot off, so you can see like on the, That is not a necessity, but I like it because sometimes those darker lines show through, especially if you're doing white or a light color. So before I start, I just kind of clean off all of my pieces that I'm working with. So you can see here a piece that's been cleaned and then a piece that hasn't, so you can see some of that soot, whereas the piece that's cleaned, you don't have those soot marks. So that's the difference between wiping it off. So it comes with the baby wipe that you can use. You don't really want to get the pieces super wet. You just want to kind of take and kind of rub them to get that off. You can also, if you use your baby wipe and it dries out, you can get it re-wet in some water and wring it out, or you can use like a damp cloth. Just make sure you're not using a lot of water because you don't want the pieces to absorb all that water. They could swell up and then they won't fit back together. Sometimes kits have little pieces, so they are taped together just to hold them in transit. This particular type of design, the same with the rainbow, is kind of like a mosaic. So what I would do in a case like this, put this away from my backer piece. The backer piece, you don't have to paint, but you can if you want to. And you can actually use it strategically with your design. So for instance, on this one, this piece right here, I'm not gonna use, but it's nice to have it to line stuff up, but I'm not gonna use it, I'm not gonna paint it. So then that way my sign, when I'm done, kind of has this depth to it. But because of that, I'm gonna wanna paint this backer board blue, like the sky, so then it'll show through. But you don't have to do that. You could paint this one blue and leave it together, and then it's kind of flat on the top. The same thing with this one. You don't have to paint the background, but if you want to do it so that certain spots are kind of like 3D and they give that two different dimensions, you can do that. But I would take this and then take my tape off very carefully. Sometimes the pieces might come with it, that's okay. You're going to take them out to paint them anyway, but I like to try and keep them together so that it makes it easier to put it together at the end. So now that I've taken the tape off, these are all loose, and I'm actually going to take this backer, this kind of outline piece off and leave these together so I kind of know where everything goes. I'm going to paint this and glue it together. So then that way these pieces here I can just kind of plop in. So I'm going to paint this and then kind of put it together and see. Some parts of this I might want to paint the background so I can show you how you can do that easier. But if you want to paint any parts of these backgrounds, make sure you don't glue it together until you've painted the background. But for this, I'm going to show you how to do a kind of like a stained look. So as you're painting, you're going to be dabbing the paint off on your paper plate. So you can use this, you can reuse these too. So I let them dry and then I can reuse it until I have too much paint on one. You can also use the brown paper that comes, like that your kit is wrapped in, to sponge off of. You don't want to use newspaper because newspaper has the newsprint that the ink, whenever you're dabbing it, sometimes the paint can take it off and then you'll get the black from the ink stained on your kit or on your pieces. So I would avoid newspaper, but you can use like paper plates. I actually use a ceramic tile that I don't care about because I just have a bunch of these lying around, so I can put paint on here and sponge off of here, and then this just cleans up. The acrylic paint comes off of this with a little soap and water. So really anything you want you can use, but you do want to sponge off your paint because you don't want to use too much. When you're using the sponges, I just take them and put them in a bowl of water and get them wet and then squeeze out all of the water. You don't really want them to be wet, you just want to kind of be damp. So I squeeze it out all of the water and then I take a towel and just kind of wring it in that just to get the rest of the moisture out. So this kind of has a little bit of moisture in it, but it's not really wet. If I'm doing some, like I kind of want the wood grain to show a little bit more, I'm going to take the sponge, dip it into the paint, I'm going to dab it off, And then I'm just gonna kind of wipe across this. And you can do the same technique with the MDF as well, where you're just kind of wiping it off so you can get this lighter brown color, but it doesn't show the wood grain, but you get the same kind of effect. Just make sure you are dabbing it off so it absorbs, so you do not have a lot of paint on your sponge. You can do it the same way with any color, so you don't have to use brown. You could do a different color and you'll still have that same effect. You do want to be careful about getting paint into any of your edges. One, especially with a design like this, because you want your pieces to be able to fit back in. If you're doing this thin layer like this, it's really not that much paint, so you shouldn't have to worry about it. But just be careful, make sure that you are dabbing your sponge off so you really don't have that much paint on your sponge. And then for this one, I think I'm gonna paint this part here black. So then my watermelon seeds will be black and it'll kind of have like a two dimension to it. So to do that, I'm gonna take a pencil and very lightly outline this just so I know where to paint that black. So you probably can't even see that, it's very light. If you do it too dark, depending on what area you're doing, you might see it show through the paint. This part I don't really have to worry about because the watermelon will be sitting there, but say you were painting this area up here, then you might see where your pencil marks are depending on how you frame it. You can also do, you know, if I just wanted to paint this whole section up here, I can just do like a very light line here, and then that way I could paint this whole section up here light yellow, and then I could just put in every other one. Maybe I'll paint them orange and then put in every other one, so then you have that dimension there too. So this would be an instance where I might use my brush since I'm trying to get it a little bit more detailed in here, and I don't have to worry about the paint going off and onto the edges. So the paints are mixable, so if you need to mix colors, you can use your plate, or if you have a dish or something that you can use to put it in. Anytime you're mixing two colors together, you always want to start with your lighter color. So if I wanted to make a little bit of a lighter yellow, I would take my white and just kind of put it on the plate. You can also pour out from your containers, whatever is most convenient for you. And then so I don't contaminate my yellow, I'm gonna rinse my brush. So I rinse my brush before dipping into the yellow. And then you can mix these two colors together. You always want to start with a smaller amount so that you can make sure you like the color before you mix more of it. You always want to start with your lighter color because it's a lot easier to add just a little bit more of the darker color than if you add more of the white color. You're going to be mixing a lot more because you'll have to add way more of the lighter color to lighten a darker color than to take the darker color and add it to the lighter color. So once I have the background painted how I want it, I can put my backer piece on. Just make sure I line it back up. You can also double check yourself and make sure you didn't miss any spots. And then I'm gonna glue this on. So to glue it, I'm gonna use the wood in the kit, and I'm gonna take this and I'm just gonna paint it . So flip it over and line it up, and then you want to press down on all the pieces, make sure they stick. And then you can also put it on like a flat surface and with like a book over it, so that'll press it down and help it seal while you paint these pieces over here. So to paint these, I'm going to put them on my piece of tape, and I just kind of try and take them in order and kind of keep them in the same orientation, try not to flip them. So to paint these, I'm going to take my sponge and dip it into the paint and then dab it off. And then I'm going to pounce these up and down. You want to make sure you don't get paint on the edges. If you get a lot of paint on the edges, they might not fit back down into the pieces. So you can do 1 coat, 2 coats, it doesn't matter. It's kind of just personal preference. With 1 coat, you'll be able to see the wood grain come through more. With 2 or 3 coats, it'll be more solid. So So now that I have all my pieces painted, I'm going to move these ones out of the way. I'm not going to need these because I painted my background. You could definitely paint them all and use them all. Just depends on how you want it to look. And now I'm going to take my pieces and glue them into their spots. So I'm going to take my applicator and I'm just going to apply the glue to the back of each piece. You want to try not to use too much glue that it like kind of squirts out, but you want to use enough so that it'll stick. I normally go at least all the way around my edges and then some in the middle. And then just push it in and keep going with all your pieces until it's all glued down. And then I tend to like to, after I put the glue on, just kind of dab it off on a plate or a piece of paper or something before putting it right onto the piece, just to get any of that excess glue off. So for these type of kits, you can see you can do the background and then kind of have it 3D, so then you don't use part of your pieces, or you're welcome to, you can paint all of them and then you won't see the background. So it's totally up to you how you want to do it, which parts you want to be raised or lowered or however, so you can definitely play around with that. Once it's all done and glued, let it sit. You might want to put like a book or something on top of it so that it can press it down and make sure that the glue dries. So to paint your pieces, you can use the tape if you want, or you can just hold them. Some of them have two shapes to them, so it's up to you how you want to paint it. If you wanted to paint the background and this the same color, like that's green and this is a green, or this is a lighter green and this is a darker green, however you want to play it. Sometimes it looks nice if you paint this and then you paint this black, so then it's like a black outline. You know, just kind of play around with it, have some fun. Before I start one of these projects, I normally lay out all my pieces and kind of think about each piece and what I want and what I want to do. So then that way I can kind of paint the same colors at the same time and kind of see what goes with what. To use the sponge, I try to avoid getting paint on the edges. The edges have this nice dark brown, so I like to leave it so it kind of looks like an outline. It's also really hard to cover that darker color. You can definitely try, but it normally takes several coats. So what I do is I just try not to get paint on the edges, and then the edges are darker so they have this nice dark outline. So to avoid getting paint on my edges, what I do is I'm going to dip it into the paint and then make sure I dab it off onto my paper plate, so then that way I don't have a big blob of paint on my sponge. And then I'm going to dab onto my piece. So I just kind of press up and down lightly, and generally you need a couple of coats. It depends on the color. Certain colors require more layers. Lighter colors like yellow and white normally need about 3 coats, whereas other colors like black can sometimes get away with 1 coat. So it just kind of depends on the look you're going for and what you want it to look like. Let it dry before you do another layer. So you would paint this type of piece the same way, depending on what color you want to do, but just kind of taking the paint so you don't have a lot on your sponge, and then just kind of sponging, dabbing up and down on the area. Once you have your base coat down, if you want to do some blending, you're going to take your same sponge that you had your background color on, and then you're just going to dip just the very tip of it into whatever color you want to blend with. Now you don't want to go right onto your piece with this because you're going to get this hard line. So we're going to take and blot it off onto our plate until this actually blends together for you. So the sponge is doing all of the work. And then just wherever you want that darker color, make sure you're lining it up on your piece, and then you're just going to kind of sponge on there back and forth. And you can make that as subtle or as dark as you want. So if you want, you could go in, I would take and put more yellow on my sponge, and then just a little tiny bit of that orange. And then don't forget to blot it off so that it bleeds together before you go in and do it onto your piece. And you can do this with any colors. So if you wanted to say do like a darker green up here, or you could also, it might look nice I'm gonna wash my sponge to get the orange out of it, but it might look nice to put like some lighter yellow or even some white up on here. So I'm gonna dip my sponge again into the yellow. If you wanted it to be really subtle, you could do the lighter yellow. If you wanted it to be more, to stand out a little bit more, you could go directly into the white and then blot it off over here on the side. So again, that's gonna blend together on the sponge for you. And so it's a very easy way to just add some definition to your pieces with very minimal work. And you can do this with any colors. The only thing you want to keep in mind is that they are not complementary colors, because those colors will make brown. So if they're across from each other on the color wheel, so red and green, blue and orange, and purple and yellow, if you do those two colors together, where they blend will be like a brownish color. So I would just stay away from blending those two colors together, but you can do it with any color. So like you could do like a lighter color, so you could add white to it. You could do a little bit of darker color, but the same thing with like if you're doing the rainbow, red to orange to yellow, you would just follow that same pattern all the way down, doing your colors. So certain pieces might have lines to show you where to put your pieces that sit on top. So those just help you, so you don't have to worry. You can just paint right over those. Sometimes there's still, from when it cuts out, there's still little pieces in small shapes and stuff. You can just take a toothpick or a pen or something and just kind of push those pieces out. And then other times you have pieces that are where the line is decorative. So say for instance in this llama one, this part right here is kind of engraved so that it has this darker print on it. So that part you actually want to try to avoid getting painted. The same thing, like if you want your lines on any of your shiplap to show, you can take your toothpick and use that to kind of clean out paint if you get any in there. But the real trick is just using that sponge, dipping it in the paint, dabbing it off so you really don't have that much paint on your piece, and then lightly sponging. It's way better to do a couple of coats. See how it's kind of like almost like cloudy? That's what you want. You want it to be very light so you don't have a lot of paint. If you have a lot of paint on your sponge, then when you go over these darker spots, the paint will push down into those spots. So you just want a little bit of paint, and then you're just gonna do a couple of layers. If you use a brush or you swipe across like this, you're way more likely to get paint into those lines. But again, like I was saying, if you do get some paint, you can kind of take the toothpick and go over that line to get out any of that extra paint. Just make sure you clean off the tip of your toothpick before you go to another line. Otherwise you might get like the big blob go on to the next piece. So to do the rainbow here, I'm gonna take my sponges and I'm gonna cut them in half. So now I have 6 sponges, so each sponge will be for a color. And I kind of split this up so that it was in sections. You can't see it because you want to be really, really light. If you use pencil and you are dark, when you paint this, it'll show through your colors. So I just very lightly kind of sectioned this, eyeballed it into 6 sections. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my sponge and I'm just going to paint, or I'm just going to sponge in the first layer. Don't worry too much about your line right there. You don't need to make it so, like super crisp, because we're going to blend it together. And so I'm just going to do that with all of my colors. Make sure after you dip it in the paint, you dab it off on a flat surface so that you don't have big blobs of paint. And so I'm kind of like going over this area a little bit. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to stay right inside the line because, like I said, we're going to blend it together. So I'm going to do a second layer, just doing the same thing where I am just kind of painting in the sections, not worrying too much about the lines. Okay, so now we're gonna start blending. So you're gonna take your sponge and you're gonna take the color below it. So I'm gonna take the red and I'm gonna get the paint on my sponge. And then I'm gonna dip the tip of it into the orange paint. Now I don't wanna just go right onto my piece, because if I go right onto my piece, I'm gonna get that harsh line. I'm gonna take it and dab it on the plate a few times so that it blends right there on the sponge. So it's already blended before I go on to my piece. And then I'm gonna make sure that it's just facing the right way, so the orange is on the bottom. And I'm gonna dab over this line. So it's gonna blend that together. And then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna take the orange, get the orange on my sponge, and then dip the yellow in the tip there. And then dab it on my plate up and down so it blends. And then go over this line. And then just keep going. So now I'm gonna take my yellow sponge, dip it in the yellow, dip just the tip into the green, and then dab it up and down so it blends on my sponge. Make sure this is facing the right way. And then I'm just gonna go over this line. And so you just keep doing that with all of the colors. And at the end with the purple, I'm not gonna add anything to it, but I am just gonna go over it to kind of blend that line right there together. And then you have your gradient. So if you want, you can go through and do that whole method over again to do a second layer, but especially with the rainbow, it just kind of blends together like that. So I normally only do my blending layer once, but depending on the colors and what you're doing, sometimes you want to do that blending layer a second time. The other thing you can do is, if you got one of the permanent markers in your kit, or if you have a permanent marker at home, just make sure it is a permanent marker and not a washable marker. And then you can take and color in these areas. Just make sure your paint is completely dry before doing that. You can also use this Sharpie to, you can also use the permanent marker to do lines or detail work on your pieces, as long as your paint is 100% dry. Just maybe let it dry overnight before doing that. If you're starting to do it and you're noticing that it doesn't really want to stick very well, the paint might not be completely dry, so just let it dry a little bit longer before you continue. And then the last thing, just depending on your kit, would be stands. So sometimes there's stands like this. These you would just paint and then you put them together. They slip together like that, and you can put your stand in. There are stands like this, so you would paint them and glue them together. Just make sure you line up in the center here and glue that together. And then those, so for something like this, he's only one layer, so this is a little thinner. And then they just kind of sit in like that. Sometimes they are a little thicker because certain pieces are 2 layers, so they're thicker. So the same thing, you would paint them, line it up, glue it together, and then those sit in the same way, just like that. Obviously, once you have everything painted and glued. And then there are these types. These types, you're going to take this piece right here and glue it to the back of your sign in the middle. Line up your edges here. And once that is dry, you're going to take this piece and put it into that slot, and then it will stand up. There is a flat edge and then a curved edge, so just make sure the curved edge is the one that goes into the slot. The flat edge is going to be on the table. So then once that's all glued, that'll stay together. I would paint them all first before putting your stand on, so then that way you don't have to worry about it not being flat while you're trying to paint. For any of these stand pieces, when you paint them, you just want to try and avoid getting paint into the slots, because if you get a lot of paint or too much paint into these slot areas, the pieces might not fit. So if that does happen, you can take a little sandpaper or something, or even like a toothpick or pen, and you can kind of try and clean out some of that paint that's in there, so then the pieces will fit. So if you are not doing a sealer, that's it. Just have some fun, play around, do your colors. Let me know if you have any questions or if you need anything. I'm always happy to help. You can send me an email. It's Natalie@Tangle and I would be happy to help you if you need anything. And then if you are doing the sealer, what you want to do is let everything dry for at least 24 hours before you seal it. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned a few things. I would absolutely love to see what you created. You can tag me on social media. It's @TangleArtistry, or shoot me an email, Natalie@TangleArtistry.com. Thanks so much, guys. I will see you next time. Bye.